today, Melissa, we want to talk about the big D, divorce. Okay.
Yes.
How does divorce play into divesting of your properties, or maybe you're purchasing a new property? I'd like you to maybe just jump in and tell us, for instance, or a recent example off the top of your mind. How does divorce impact property and owning it?
First and foremost, it's acknowledging that divorce does impact real estate transactions, right? I think that, for all of our listeners out there who are thinking, well, I'm getting divorced, but I'm going to sell my property first. Slow down. It doesn't really work that way. The reason being is because there's this concept of marital assets. So provided there was no prenuptial agreement amongst the parties prior to the marriage, or a postnuptial agreement during the marriage that specifically identifies the way assets are being divested, then you're sort of stuck looking at the state laws to determine how is this asset going to be handled. And if it's a marital asset, chances are it's going to be a 50-50 split. And if you owned it before, then the equity that has grown during the time of the marriage would also be subject to marital recapture. There's also, of course, marital debts that need to be handled, and other assets, alimony, child support, other factors that all play in. So a lot of times the real estate ends up being sort of the linchpin to figure out the way that all of this is going to be diversified or separated and dispersed amongst those parties. So I think that it's really important when there is going to be a divorce situation to first recognize, okay, there's going to be an impact. Now what?
So what advice do you have to folks that maybe are living together now? They have some kids, like you mentioned, but neither spouse has anywhere to go, and this house is their only asset. What do you suggest to folks that are pretty much, up against it as far as their financial situation?
In large part, it's going to depend on whether or not the parties are in a good place. So, certainly you're not in love anymore. You don't want to be together anymore. But is there a lot of anger? Is there a lot of emotion? Is it a toxic situation? If those are the cases that you're facing, your best bet is to basically just walk away from the property and the party. You have to separate yourself from that, whether you go stay with a family member or a friend. It can be very volatile and it can be downright dangerous. So I think it really kind of depends on the overall circumstances. Now, assuming that you don't have any risks, any major risks there, then I've definitely had parties where they've separated sort of within the domicile, right? So mom lives in one bedroom, dad lives in another bedroom, kids, may or may not know what's going on. And then they decide, okay, well, we're going to sell the property and split the proceeds. But they have to be very clear with their respective divorce attorneys that, look, I need this money to go buy something or to go rent something because this is the extent of our financial liquidity. And I don't have the ability to move forward without the sale of this, the proceeds from the sale of this property. Which frankly, Greg, is one of the main issues I've been seeing recently, probably the last handful of divorce transactions I've been involved in. The parties are not yet ready to decide how the money is being distributed. So we end up having the closing, but the proceeds are all held in escrow, which is the other way that it can happen, right? So the first option, the parties divest themselves first and then go through the quickie divorce. The second option is, everybody comes to an agreement. We're going to sell and distribute at least the proceeds of the house right away because we need those to kind of move on to other things. And then the third is that this is kind of like your granddaddy, right? This is the bad one where there's too much animosity in the transaction within the parties. And the real estate transaction is just another piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole enchilada. So in that case, you end up where the attorneys oftentimes are going to be fighting over this during the proceedings of, well, we've got all this money from the equity of the sale of the property that we're still sitting on. What do you want to do relative to child support? How do you want to handle this person's retirement account? And honestly, it's all pawns in the players of how they're going to be able to move forward and really separate themselves altogether as a married couple.